Hello and welcome. This week is week 5 on my 50 state quilts journey, and we'll be heading to Vermont this week. The most interesting fact that I found about Vermont is it is the only state whose state capital, Montpelier, does not have a McDonald's. And in 1996, the entire state got their first McDonald's. Interesting. So, anyway, that's where we're headed. We're headed to Vermont. So, offer yourself some gratitude and appreciation for allowing yourself this creative time. And thank you for joining me on this adventure. Yeah. Whether it be just for a week or for 50, I appreciate you. I'm going to go ahead and push my supplies off to the side for the moment. And all we need to get started is our pencil and our ruler. Okay, so first things first, we're going to go ahead and offer a 3/16 border around the tile's edge. So I'm just laying little hash marks of 3/16 of an inch on the tile's edge, and I'm just going to offer myself 2 hash marks because I was finding that my borders were getting a little wonky by just laying one. So totally up to you if you embrace the wonk and offer yourself grace for any crooked border lines or frame lines. That's perfect. And we're just going to connect those dots from side to side. Offering this framed border that is inevitably what we're going to be stitching together to create one big masterpiece, if in fact you're joining me on this whole journey. Yeah. So once we have this frame, we're going to measure from side to side every 7.5 lines. So 7/16 and the space in between. All right. So just blow this up so that we can kind of count together across the way. So each 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the space in between. And instead of counting that half space that's existing there, I'm going to go ahead and count 7 and a space again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and a space. And I'm going to do this all the way across. Your last little section will be just ever so slightly bigger, but it is okay. We're just going to accept that as okay. By the time we're done in true Zentangle fashion, you'll never notice that that row is larger. So once we have those dots laid, we're going to go ahead, turn our tile, and connect those dots side to side. So we're going to, for the moment, be creating these rows. At our 7/16 wide. So now that we have these rows created, I'm going to go ahead and offer the same measurements in the opposite direction. So every 7/16 and a half line, I'm going to add a little hash mark. Remembering that as you're adding these hash marks, you're not using the half as part of your count. You're starting with the next line with 1 and going back up to 7. And then once those hash marks are completed, we're going to go ahead and also connect those side to side, which is going to give us this beautiful gridded space. Being mindful that you're not going through the framework, we're only drawing these lines between the frames. Okay, so we're going to need our acetate or your palette or whatever porous-free surface you're using to blend your markers. But for the moment, okay, so now that we have that gridded background, we're going to create some division into some of these blocks. So the first and second boxes, we're going to draw a diagonal from bottom left corner to top right corner. Then we're going to skip 2 boxes and add a diagonal in the next 2 boxes. Diagonal from bottom left to top right in the next 2 boxes. So we're going to have 2 diagonals, 2 blank boxes, and then 2 diagonals and a single empty box. Okay. In the next row, we're going to have 2 blank boxes, and the third one is going to get that diagonal. Again, keeping that diagonal the same direction, bottom left to top right. Then we're going to skip 3 boxes, and on that final box at the end of that row, we're going to add another diagonal. So here's where we are so far. 2 diagonals, 2 blank boxes, 2 diagonals, 1 blank box, 2 blank boxes, a diagonal, 3 blank boxes, and a diagonal. Okay. So now that we're in the third row, this first box is going to get 2 diagonals. So I'm going to lay a diagonal just to the right side of my corner. And then I'm going to turn my tile so that I can add another diagonal to the left side of that corner. Thinly. So I have this now double diagonal box to start the third row. So you're just adding a straight line on either side of the corner. And it doesn't, don't be too particular. It doesn't have to be the perfect space. It doesn't have to, you're just adding a channel to incorporate the corner of that box. We're going to skip a box and add another diagonal. We're going to skip a box, and once again, we're going to do that double diagonal. So to the right of the corner and the left of the corner, giving us this double line or arid line in a similar width that we have already done. Skip a box and add another diagonal. So in this fourth row, we're going to skip that completely and go to the fifth row. And whatever you did in the first 3 rows, you're going to do in the bottom 3 rows. So first 2 boxes are diagonals. Skip 2 boxes, 2 diagonals. And we're going to come down to that next row, skip 2 boxes, diagonal. Skip 3 boxes, diagonal. Once we get down to that bottom row, we're going to start with that double line on either side to the right and left of that corner. Skip a box, add a single diagonal. Skip a box, add our double diagonal. Skip a box and add our final diagonal. So here we have it. I'm not sure if you're noticing the visual here, but these are leaves for the fall foliage of Vermont. Yeah. So once we get this all together, we're going to start seeing some leaves happening here. Okay. So once again, just because we've used the ruler so tediously, I'm going to just take my kneaded eraser and just pounce on top of those lines ever so slightly. I obviously still need those lines. I'm not erasing them. I'm just toning them back so that they're not so pronounced as I begin the coloring process. And once again, we're going to start a little bit backwards in that we're going to be adding our color, the foundation of our fabrics before we go to our tangling. Okay. Now that we're all strung up, we're going to grab our acetate and we're going to start first with our 977, whatever brown you have going on. And I'm going to go directly to my tile for the brown. And I'm just going to add in that little arid space where we did those 2 diagonals, adding brown directly into that space. So this is inevitably going to be the stem of our leaf. You can make this green. You can make it red, whatever you see the stems of your leaves becoming. It's perfect. Okay. So now that we have the stems of our leaf, our ultimate goal is to create a fabric that looks like fall foliage. So that's where our red, orange, and yellow palette come into play. These are the colors that I've chosen. Knowing now that you're dealing with fall foliage, you can grab whatever colors speak to you. And I'm also going to grab my blender. So I'm going to create a little palette of red, orange, and yellow. So I'm going to start with just adding some yellow in there. And then I'm going to take some orange and kind of go over top of that. And I can mix the colors directly on my palette as well, right? So just letting these colors blend together into these spaces, being mindful of those lines, right? Because these are fabric, right? So we wouldn't have a bleed over. Just be mindful of where you're headed with your marker. And you're going to, when you get to the triangular spaces, half of the space is colored in leaf color. Notice the shape of the leaf. And then the other half is the background material. So just be careful as you're going through this so that you don't lose that leaf shape. So I'm just picking up colors, marbling these colors together. But the yellow is so light that if we blend that together, it's lost. So notice that I started with just patches of yellow. I can go over them if I feel like there's, too much, and tone that down a little bit. If I want to add more direct red, I can just go directly to the red instead of mixing that with that orange color. So background material, background fabric, just trying to find a color for fall foliage, not caring if you have dark spots, light spots, kind of washed out spots. It's okay, because remember, as we go through the process with our tangles, that offers dimension into our tangling as well, because we're not adding shading to the tangles themselves, but just to the blocks, showing that pucker of fabric. So here's our first leaf. This is the shape, the design that you're going to see by coloring in only those half triangular shapes. So moving on to the next one, adding a bit of my yellow into the palette before I grab those darker colors that I can mix and mingle together into that space. You can always pull back on some yellow if you feel like you've gotten too much, tone that down. And being mindful of those triangular spaces. We don't want to do the whole block. We want those triangular spaces to divide and offer the peaks of that leaf. not smoothing out this color, allowing those blotches to have a voice, in turn, allowing your tangles to also have a different voice as you add those expressions on top of this beautiful background. So really not wanting to spend time to blend completely or soften these out. Just enjoy the process, let go of the perfectionism that sees those streaks or those lines. Just building the background of our fabric. Always add more color to make these more vibrant as you finish up, right? We can always go back, add as many layers to our fabric as we see going through this process. And starting with that yellow, so that it has some kind of presence in this fall foliage. Okay, I'm going to call my leaves done. And know that as we add those tangles on top, so beautiful. All right, I'm going to head to my 451 now. And in every open space, I'm going to go directly to my tile in a circular motion. And every white space is now going to get this 451 direct, or whatever color you're using as your background material. But I figured the beautiful blue skies against this fall foliage would be the perfect color. Again, offering a tie-in to any one of the tiles that we've already done, just so that there's again some kind of cohesiveness to our overall quilt when we're done. If you're doing the whole adventure and journey with me. So any one of the greens you could pick, any one of the yellows, anything that you see bringing this tile or this material, this fabric to life. A little bit of a different technique, having to measure each one of our pieces, our patches, and using rulers and stuff instead of individual pieces of paper. Again, a little bit tedious, but I'm just loving seeing all of these quilt blocks coming together every week, watching the quilt just come to life. So fun. So the name Vermont means green mountains. So green would be a great introduction into this background as well, to kind of honor its name. I just wanted to kind of keep it light. But now that I say that out loud, that would have been a really great idea. So using the marker direct in a circular motion, we're still going to get that typical overlap of marker, but it's going to be a bit more haphazard than if we were using those straight lines back and forth to add the background color. So yes, we're getting overlap, which inevitably is giving us those dark spots versus those light spots. But again, a bit more textured and haphazard than the typical straight line coloring of a marker. It's in these dark spots and light spots that we get that automatic shading that's going to happen to the backgrounds or inclusions of our tangles, without having to go in and individually add shading to the tangles themselves. Yeah. Okay. So this beautiful texture is happening. If you feel now that the background is colored, you want to add a bit more color to or dimension to your leaves, which this leaf is kind of not really popping for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit more red into that mix. Give it a bit more depth. Yeah, those leaves speaking to you for just a little bit more love. Just take the time now to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'm going to call mine done, and I'm going to head to my frame. So this week I'm going to do my frame in the yellow and the orange. So I'm going to use the yellow direct to the long rectangular space, and I'm going to choose to put my orange into the corners. But I'm starting with my yellow first so that I don't drag that orange by mistake into my yellow if I touch the yellow to the orange. So I'm just working with my light color first. Try to avoid any contamination of the colors, right? And again, in that little space, I'm going to offer the orange. I'm going to take that yellow back into my hand just because I'm seeing these white deckled edges. Again, I don't want to see any of that when I put my quilt together. So I want to make sure that I get my edge color all the way around my tile so that we have the look of material and not deckled edge paper, right? So just getting those edges covered in our colors as well. All right. We can ooh and ah at this stage already, but we have some tangling to do. So here we go. So I'm going to be using my light gray, my number 42, to add my tangles into these spaces. And although Vermont is the largest producer of maple syrup in the U.S., I could not find a tangle that really worked for me to kind of embrace that maple syrup vibe. So I went with the state pie instead, which is the apple pie. So we're going to be doing the tangle apicore into the leaves to honor the state pie of the apple pie. All right. So apicore begins with a fescue-like shape, except it's going to arch up, bend in with its head. So we're not going to get too carried away with how this fescue is formed as far as, elegance, but we're going to keep it short and slightly bent into the center. And then on the right side, I'm going to arch, bend, and tap that seed on the left. So our fescues are facing one another in just a short little stout way. Now I'm going to start back at the beginning, and I'm going to arch up and around and add another fescue that bends into the center. And I'm going to start on the right, and I'm going to mirror that, arching, bending, and adding a seed into the center. So we're working on that star of seeds inside of our apple, right? So once we have these 4 seeds coming together, I'm going to do one more off to the left, grow it up above, and tuck that seed right into the open valley of the seeds below. So there's our apicore. So we're going to do that in each one of these boxes of our foliage. 2 fescues coming to the center, touching. 2 fescues growing above, forming that 4-seeded star. And then one more seed that nestles right in the center. Fescue to the center, fescue to the center. Fescue that wraps to the center and tucks. On the right side, tucking another fescue into that foursome, and then wrapping one more right into the center. So once we have the full boxes done, this triangular material is the same material that we are creating with the apicore in the full box. So we'll only be doing half of the apicore into the half sections. And whichever half you're on will determine if it's the 3 strokes of the apicore or just the 2 strokes. So if your triangle goes to the left, you're going to get those 3 fescues. And if your triangle goes to the right, you're only getting 2. Okay? So here's where the magic happens. Allow that repetition to flow from your pen, filling in these boxes deliberately and intentionally, embracing every stroke to create those apicores. Maybe check in on those shoulders and drop them if they've come up to your ears, right? Give yourself a breath. Maybe blink those eyes. Here's our apicore leaves to honor the state pie of Vermont, the apple pie. So fall foliage, we have that covered. Maple syrup, was too difficult. Couldn't really find anything that kind of really spoke to me as being maple syrup-esque. Apple pie, check. And covered bridges. Yeah. Covered bridges is a Vermont thing. Another thing Vermont is known for is Ben and Jerry's. And yep, couldn't find anything for that either. So just know if you're ever in Vermont, you want to grab some Ben and Jerry's, right? All right. So in the background, I'm going to go covered bridges with honoring those covered bridges with the tangle or a tangulation of bridges. Bridges is a single box. One single box is going to get one image. That's all going to kind of come together. So think fragments, really, is where we're kind of headed here. So I'm going to draw an arch that cuts across the corner on the left, and I'm going to draw an arch that cuts across the corner to the right. Then I'm going to aura that arch on the inside. And by default of how those arches cut across the corner, we have this diamond shape. So I'm going to honor that diamond shape by drawing that inside. So mirroring or auraing the sides of our box to create the top of our diamond, and then adding the points to those diamonds down below. The inner points of those diamonds are going to get a line that connects them from side to side. Now that you have one box created, each box is going to connect upon itself by using the same concept, just turning your tile. So if my box is going off to the left, the box below is going to go off to the right. So just using the line that exists as the beginning point to my arch below will get you this connection, one box to the next. So in its truest form, this tangle has a background of lines that happen under the bridges. But I didn't want it to become too busy, so I'm just allowing the bridges to kind of stand on their own without the background. So bridges is the tangle that we're using. Actually, I think I'm saying bridges, it's really just bridge. So now that you have a couple boxes put together, just take that pause and change that perspective, yeah? See how they're all working together, even though they're in separate boxes, yeah? That's the vision that we're headed for right here. Again, enjoying that repetition, not having to really think about what's next. Once you get a couple of those boxes rolling, it all just makes sense. Every now and again, just pause and change that perspective to see how that pattern is coming along, how it's all working together in that background. Seeing that magic just unfold right before your eyes. So fun. When you get to these little triangular boxes, there's no right or wrong, right? How are you sewing this patch? Some of them connect, and it's easy to determine, what direction to head. And then others, it's not quite so visual. So how are you sewing that patch together? No right or wrong. What's visually pleasing to you? Don't forget to breathe. So there we have our bridge. So there's our bridge in the background fabric of our beautiful block to honor all of those covered bridges in Vermont. So you guessed it. We're into stitching now, and I'm going to use my dark gray number 44. Each and every one of these boxes and triangles needs to be stitched together. Now, your choice. If you feel like it's going to get a little bit busy doing each individual box, you could just do like an applique of these leaves and just do the outline. I chose to do every box and honor each piece of the quilt. That's a personal choice. So just options as you go through. So slowly, deliberately, intentionally, trying to avoid those tails, we're going to stitch each one of these pieces of our block together on either side of that string line. So the string line is going to divide two quilted pieces together, right? So the quilt, the sewing line needs to happen on both sides of that string line. Again, slowly and deliberately, intentionally, just enjoying the process. Turning the tile to meet your hand in the most comfortable way to achieve these stitches. Each stroke of that pen, think of the needle going up and down. Not from a machine, but from someone's hand. Amazing. Give yourself a check-in, noticing your heartbeat, your breath through this intentional process. Yeah. Has it changed from where you started? Did you even notice? So when you get to your stems, the stems are a different material than your background bridge material. Yeah. So we have a solid brown material that's happening for those stems. So you're going to want to honor that different piece of material with some stitching as well. If you've gotten a bit thin on that brown material and you can't stitch, that's okay. Just know that if that was fabric, right, that would be a whole other piece of material. So this week's quilt was chosen from the Workbasket quilt book of 50 states. It's been interesting, and you may have heard me say this before, but I have two resources of the 50 state quilts, and I would have thought that a state quilt would be a state quilt, like it was a universal thing, and it is not. So some weeks I choose the inspiration from the Cobble Hill Puzzle, 50 States Puzzle, and others I choose from the Workbasket 50 State Blocks book. And this week comes from the book. So the maple leaf design, or I'm sorry, the Cobble Hill design was different from the maple leaf design. And I just thought it was a fun way to show one of the facts about the state. So I chose the maple leaf version. It would be so much easier if all of these quilts were opus tiles. I think I've said that before because the book has patterns for a 12-inch block. So I would have had a much easier time deciphering measurements using the patterns from the book. But It's been fun testing my math skills as well as my kind of deciphering of state facts into tangles. It's been fun exploring how to make that happen and bring that all together. Yourself tightening that grip with each stitch. Pause, maybe stretch those fingers. Reset with that pen in your hand. Offer a lighter grip. Definitely offer yourself that breath, change that perspective, hold that tile out at arm's length, and see that block coming together. All of those beautiful stitches laying on top of your beautiful tangled background. It doesn't, in my opinion, take away from. I feel as though it adds. I just love how each of those stitches brings each one of those boxes together and gives each individual box a voice. So yeah, heading into the outside frame, we're just going to go ahead and stitch those corners. And again, I'm just choosing to stitch along the top of this framed border for the moment, because I'm not quite sure still how these tiles are going to come together for me. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be stitching across the bottom the same as we've been doing, or if I'm going to kind of add something a little bit fun in there. So if you know that you're only doing one tile and you want to stitch the edge of your tiles frame, by all means, definitely do that. If you know that you are going to do all the states or any number of the states and you want to stitch them together, by all means, add that stitching right now. I'm just uncertain how I truly want to bring these 50 tiles all together. Okay, so now that we're all strung up, we have our beautiful fabric colors and we have our beautiful tangles displayed now. We have to add our shading. And just like every other week, I'm not going to focus on the individual tangles, but rather the quilt squares coming together. So I'm going to focus those shadows or that depth right around our stitching. All right, so I'm going to start with my fall foliage, my leaf shapes first, and I'm using my 926, the carmine red. Whatever you have in your stash is perfect. And right along that sewn edge in a circular motion, I'm going to offer my shading. So what this is going to do, some places are going to be much the same color when we have those deep reddy colors, but we also have those light, more washed out sections as well. So they'll be more noticeable, of course, where the light is, but going all the way around each one of those sections, adding that shading right to the pucker of those sewn edges, which in turn keeps the center of each one of those blocks open and highlighted. So just offering this shading around that puckered edge where the sewing kind of poofs up that center, we're allowing that poof to be visible by the highlight that by default of going around each one of these blocks is offered naturally. So just shading right around that sewn edge of each patch. And if you don't think it's really doing much, stop halfway through and change that perspective and notice what a difference this simple little technique has to the overall vision of your quilt block. It's just a subtle, soft, circular motion, but definitely offers a depth that's not found on the leaf that's not done yet, right? Not laying too heavy of a coat. You can always add more, much more difficult to pull it away, take it away, especially with a colored pencil, right? So those centers are just popping right now. I'm headed into my 1088, that muted turquoise, and that's what I'm going to use in the background blue. And again, I'm going to focus on each individual patch, each quilt patch or square that we're sewing together right against the edge of our sewn threads. Circular motion, just softening, adding that shadow and puffing up that center to show that pillowy highlight. Quilt is just coming to life right before our eyes. Can't wait to add this to the collection and lay it next to the other completed states. I'm enjoying watching the quilt grow block by block. Changing that perspective. Did you shade around each block? If you haven't, that one block will stick out. Just like if you miss stitching, changing that perspective will just scream out at you. Hey, missing a line with your thread, right? So being up close and personal sometimes doesn't allow us the whole picture. Changing that perspective, pulling your tile away at arm's length. You could probably be oohing and ahhing right about now, yeah? That's when our perspective changes and the little things that the little things jump out. So I'm going to head to that 1082, that chocolate, and I'm going to go back to those stems. And those stems for me are pretty narrow. So I'm going to try to stay as close to that edge as I can. And again, if you think that that didn't matter, just see the difference between one stem versus the other. So definitely worth adding a little bit of that chocolate into those stems and giving that depth, giving that shadow right at the edge, which kicks out that beautiful line of the lighter brown in the center of each one of those stems. So there we have it, our state quilt for Vermont, the Green Mountain State. We have our beautiful fall foliage, our apple pie representation, and the covered bridges. Offer yourself gratitude and appreciation, and offer your signature, your chop, sign your quilt piece or your block. Until next time, thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I appreciate you.